right on the Rio Grande at the Texas, New Mexico, and Mexico border. This place is really significant because in 2021, after the construction of the longest stretch of border wall on the U.S. Mexico border, a wolf came out of the Gila wilderness. And this wolf went down to the border wall and spent 2 days pacing back and forth before it finally returned.
So this wolf must have been really confused by this new barrier that was constructed along the U.S. Mexico border.
Most definitely. The border wall is essentially an uncontrolled ecological experiment on a continental scale. It could cut off essential migration routes for a variety of wildlife who have learned after generation from their parents and family cohorts where the water is, where the food is, where the prey is.
All right, let's head out.
Let's do it.
Here in the U.S. and around the world, geopolitical conflict and migration crises are fueling an unprecedented boom in border wall construction.
Countries have been building fences between their friends and neighbors and enemies on a scale that we have never seen before in human history.
The goal is to protect national borders from illegal migrant crossings and even war.
Passport? Yeah, 1 sec.
But people find a way through.
Duro, el camino muy duro. Ecuador, África, Nigeria, de todas partes del mundo.
For the wildlife, it's another story.
A deer could not cross. A bigger mammal, a bear, could not cross through here.
In this documentary for In Real Life, we examine the ecological costs of these new high-tech border walls and some of the solutions for allowing wildlife to cross.
This is the first open gate I've seen.
In a time when more and more animals are on the move to survive a changing climate.
Wow, so you can see everything from up here. So what we're doing with these walls is slicing ecosystems in half.
We are dividing continents.
So it's about 5 o'clock in the morning. We're heading out deep into the Białowieża forest in Poland, right near the Belarus border, looking for some of the last remaining wild bison in Europe. We're gonna see what we can find.
Eastern Poland's Białowieża forest is the largest remaining primeval forest in Europe.
Right here?
My guide, Wojtek, is looking for signs of the wolves, lynx, red deer, and one of the last wild herds of European bison that call this forest home.
Red deer and old tracks bison.
Old bison tracks.
Red deer.
That's red deer. And then what's this? That's red.
Badger.
Oh, that's the badger. Oh, that's bison. Okay.
Bison. Goat.
Towards that direction. The bison tracks, you'd think they would be much bigger because they're just an enormous animal, but their tracks are actually these little, the size of my hand. Feels like we're getting closer.
We keep searching, driving through the easternmost villages in the European Union as we get closer and closer to the border with Belarus. Finally, we spot a small herd in a clearing at the edge of the forest.
Two males and 5 females and 1 young.
One young. Oh, they're beautiful. It's so wild to see bison in Poland. It's something I never thought existed here.
As it gets lighter, the bison slowly make their way back into the forest. These trees and the animals that live here have been protected for centuries by kings and tsars. and since the 1970s as a transboundary UNESCO World Heritage Site, connecting the forest and the animals on both sides of the border. A status now threatened by the new wall.
I'm standing right now right at the Poland-Belarus border. There's this new 18-foot steel wall with razor wire on top. There's cameras on me right now. This is a heavily militarized zone. We actually have to leave very soon before the soldiers come and tell us to move on. This wall has divided this habitat completely in half. The animals on both sides that used to cross freely now come across basically razor wire and an impenetrable wall.
This 115-mile wall was built in 2021 to halt the movement of refugees escaping war and poverty in the Middle East and Africa. But today, it serves as a hardened defense against Russia and Belarus. It doesn't take long for the border guard to arrive, cutting our time here short.
Border guard, should we not film? Are we okay?
Rozumiem, Straż Graniczna, plutonowy Rafał, Wojsko Polskie, tak? Tracił dokumenty
I have mine in the truck. Should I go get it?
i paszporty.
Passport? Yeah, one sec.
Such an astonishing moment in history.
Thousands of West Germans come to make the point that the wall has suddenly become irrelevant.
It wasn't that long ago that the world was celebrating a new era of open borders.
I was a student taking my final exams in 1989 when all of these kind of border walls began coming down. I was watching on television, people were taking a hammer and knocking down the Berlin Wall. When the kind of revolutions were happening all across Eastern Europe, when suddenly people were leaving East Germany and heading west in their old cars just to move across the border, which had opened up for the first time in decades. And this was sort of an incredible time of change when suddenly borders were being wiped out. The European Union was expanding, people could move and travel. We began to suddenly have an opportunity to think about the continent as sort of an ecological whole, something that didn't actually have these artificial borders crossing it, but it was all one great big green ecological environment.
Opening new corridors for wildlife in the east to migrate into Western Europe, where large herbivore and carnivore species saw a tremendous recovery. But it didn't last.
Now the Polish PM says the decision to build a 5-meter-high barrier to prevent illegal migration into Poland will have a significant...
Some of the monsters that we hoped had been banished forever had actually really only been hiding in the shadows. And in the late 2010s, these things began creeping out again. And one of the responses which countries came up with was this rapid construction of border fences.
Today, there are more than 74 border walls around the world, and many more are in the planning stages. That's 6 times the number of barriers than at the end of the Cold War, altogether covering more than 20,000 miles.
So we have quickly transitioned from a very brief period of open borders and moving towards a collective action to conserve wildlife to a world where suddenly we're fencing wildlife in and fencing ourselves in to ever smaller and smaller areas.
In Poland, wildlife biologists are scrambling to understand the impacts of an ancient ecosystem now sliced in half. But the challenges of working in a conflict zone become immediately clear.
So we're looking for a camera trap, right?
Yes.
Do they get taken? Stolen sometimes?
Yes, but it wouldn't.
Yeah.
Not this one.
Hey, Kasha, I think I found something.
Really?
So I don't know if, is that one of yours?
That is one of ours.
That's one of yours. There's the extra.
Okay. Yeah.
So what does that mean? Somebody,
Yeah.
why would they do that?
So someone vandalized our camera.
And took the camera.
Took the camera and left the SD card, but damaged So that's one camera down, and this might happen all season, but I mean, we were hoping it naively that it wouldn't. We can't really say how animals are going to respond. Some will walk along this barrier and look for gaps, and they'll bounce back and forth against it and back into the forest and then back to the barrier. Others, like the small carnivores, will probably go through the concertina somehow, but the larger mammals will not.
Cutting off one of the last remaining migration corridors for Eurasian lynx, wolves, and other large mammals coming from the east into Western Europe.
120 images.
Scientists like Kasia, who are trying to document these changes, have been accused of treason by Poland's pro-government media and face constant harassment in the field.
Species that come in. And here comes the border guard, and I would definitely put your camera down now and get out of here.
Okay, put it down.
Morning, Sam.
Hey guys.
On the U.S. Mexico border, the speed and scale of border wall construction and the wildlife migration corridors it divides are impossible to comprehend without taking to the air.
Tucson departure Centurion 6094 Bravo is 3,400, climbing 9,000. You guys have some beautiful light this morning.
Of this altitude.
These mountains are called the Sky Islands, and it's one of the most biodiverse places on the planet. It's also the northernmost range of the jaguar. A string of recent camera trap sightings here showed jaguars on the move from northern Mexico through the last open stretches of borderlands, a climate escape valve for one of the many species that would be stopped in their tracks if the border wall is ever completed.
Delta 1 to 22 Centurion 904 Bravo, thanks.
More than 700 miles, roughly a third of the entire U.S. Mexico border, have been walled or fenced. I traveled with Miles Traphagen along hundreds of miles of the border wall to get a sense of what it means to the wildlife and the people who encounter it.
Hello. How are you? How long have you been traveling?
1 month.
Do you know where you are in the United States?
Yeah, I know small.
Arizona.
Okay. It is United States now.
You're in the United States now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that.
Yes. Arizona is the state.
Okay.
Near Tucson.
Okay.
There's Border Patrol. So these guys just spent over a month walking through the Darien Gap, walking all the way up through Central America and Mexico to reach the border here. They're just arriving now to claim asylum. They're not, the Border Patrol's here. These aren't, people who are running from the Border Patrol. They're here to process paperwork, basically.
Even if construction on this stretch of wall continues, Miles doubts it would prevent humans from crossing. He's captured footage of migrants on one of his trail cams with a 31-foot ladder, just high enough to scale the fence.
Okay, so I see the wall kind of go, it's basically a barbed wire fence. They're gonna keep blasting through this mountain to continue that.
That was the goal.
That's the goal.
That stopped on January 20th of 2021.
For now.
For now.
If this wall is extended through this mountain range, what kind of ecological impact are we talking about?
It's unknowable. They're not migrating for simply a change of scenery. They're following food, they're following forage, they're following water, they're following shelter, mating, fleeing predation. And in a time period where we have a changing climate, more drought cycles, wildlife need more options and not fewer.
A recent study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences found that by 2070, roughly a third of the world's mammals could have to cross borders as climate change shifts more than half of their habitat to new countries where they don't exist today. The U.S. Mexico border has some of the highest numbers of species at risk from a border wall. On the Mexican side of the wall, conservationists still feel the sting of the 30-foot steel barrier now separating protected habitat on both sides of the border.
It's a really hot spot of biodiversity. And unfortunately, with this wall built here, we are in a really conflict area because the wildlife could not cross on that part.
Jose Manuel takes me to a spot where a small opening was created to let wildlife pass.
The
So
square
it's so
is,
small.
Yeah, it's really small. You could see how it's clean.
This is almost what's left of the connectivity between the refuge to the north on the U.S. side and what has happened with the restoration project here.
That's right. If we want to preserve the richness of this biodiversity, we need to create really friendly passes for wildlife. This is not friendly, unfortunately.
Yeah, we can maybe zoom in a little.
Back in Poland, Kasia returns to her office to download the day's data and check the images on the camera traps, including the broken SD card from the stolen camera. The thieves knew what they were doing, turning the camera to the ground as it triggered to avoid detection.
So that's what we managed to get.
Yeah. Why is it so important to be out there documenting the impacts of this border fence?
I think this is all important to document in order to inform mitigation measures down the line. In the anticipation that this fence, just like the Berlin Wall, will also eventually come down.
So the hope is that
this forest becomes one again.
In the time since we filmed with Kasia, increasing tensions along the border have further hampered her ability to carry out her research. Meanwhile, the fence building in Europe continues, going from 0 to 19 in the last 2 decades, more than 1,200 miles of barriers. And with Finland now building a 10-foot fence with razor wire along its Russian border, the animals of Western Europe will soon be almost completely isolated from the East, increasing the threat of inbreeding and, ultimately, local extinctions. But on the U.S. Mexico border, a recent lawsuit by 18 states and 2 organizations over how the Trump administration paid for the wall has brought a rare win for wildlife.
So this is because of the lawsuit?
Yeah, this is because of the lawsuit. This is the first open gate I've seen. So this has been a long road. We started in 2018, a lot of negotiation, a lot of back and forth, a lot of writing, a lot of mapping work, and finally we are seeing the end result of this.
Under the lawsuit's settlement terms, the Department of Homeland Security has to create several large wildlife passages to mitigate the wall's impact on critical migration corridors for animals like jaguar, black bear, and Sonoran pronghorn.
But I've got to also see...
Miles has a permit to monitor the first open gates with trail cameras.
I'm just going to take a look there and just see how obvious that is. Even if we don't capture anything ourselves on camera moving through this, knowing that possibility exists for animals is just, it really warms my heart.
I mean, this is just the very beginning of being able to monitor this kind of work.
It's the very beginning. I'm just glad they're open and that the process worked. So it's our first chance of righting some wrongs. We've got company here.
As we're talking, a Border Patrol agent interrupts us, a sign that these new wildlife passages are being closely monitored for any illegal human migration.
Oh, what are you guys doing?
Down here filming a wildlife documentary. Yeah.
Noticed us pretty quickly. So is this all part of the process with trying to do science in these border regions? I mean, this is a militarized zone, pretty much.
This has never been done before. There is no playbook. And so we are improvising. This is a pretty big compromise to say that they're going to open up passages for wildlife to come through, which obviously means that there would be a human component.
We're going to build the wall. We have no choice. We have no choice.
Critics say the wildlife gates are part of an intentional open borders policy. But under the ruling, the gates can be closed by Homeland Security at any time for border security operations.
So even in a time of geopolitical conflict, we're building more border walls around the world than ever before in history. It doesn't have to be a total loss for wildlife.
To have gates every so often, for them to be able to gain passage, that could mean the difference between survival from one year to the next. To see this open now is very satisfying that something came out of all that work and we're able to make a difference.